Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome back. This is Christopher Aaron. It is November 7th, 2018. We are one day following the elections here in the U.S., the midterm elections, and there is a change. We have control going back to the Democrats in the House, control being retained by the Republicans in the Senate. We don't focus on these types of political fundamentals too often, just to let you know why, because one of my personal beliefs, having experienced, for example, being overseas in Afghanistan under two different administrations, both under Bush and under Obama, is that there was very little change as to the actual policies that were being implemented, as to the waste of resources, the waste of human lives. And I saw this with my own eyes, and there are some token differences between the two parties, but one of my general philosophies is that I think the entire system, we're talking about two horses that are running down perhaps two different lanes, but of the same track, to use that analogy. And so I don't think there is a huge fundamental difference between the two parties as they exist in this system. If you have a different opinion, I would love to hear it. So please type a comment below. But that is where I come from as far as the political system. I personally am looking for a much more significant change in this country and around the world over the years ahead. Much more significant than just do we lean back toward Democrat versus Republican. I think something much more significant has to happen to really set the course of this country and the course of the world back on the path toward prosperity and respect for one another as human beings. So that's my little opening monologue, and I want to look at a facet of the precious metals market here in this week's update that is very important. I think it's critically important based on what we're seeing, especially in the stock market right now. And what is it? We're talking about silver. When does it really perform best? And this is a snippet of part of the analysis that went out to premium subscribers a few weeks ago. I want to share that with you today because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's important. I know there's a lot of silver investors out there, and I want you to know I align with you philosophically. I align with you as far as the understanding of what's happening to the destruction of fiat currency. However, we really have to pay attention to some of the hard data, and it doesn't always align with the simple notion of buy precious metals because the dollar is going to zero eventually, which of course I think it will. So let's look at this question. Silver, when does it perform best? And as a backdrop, once again, we're talking about this from a broad picture perspective here. We're talking about the overvaluation in the U.S. stock market. We're looking at the stock market from the early 1950s through the present. We're looking at this indicator that was coined by none other than Warren Buffett himself. So a rather successful mainstream stock market investor who coined this indicator here called the Buffett indicator. And he's looking at the ratio of the total valuation of all the corporations in the United States versus the total product of the entire United States. And what we're looking at here, there should be some relationship between these two. What we're looking at here is that the present valuation is the second most expensive that the stock market has ever been in the history of data keeping. And we're going almost 70 years now back. This is the second most expensive that the stock market has been after the NASDAQ bubble of the year 2000, which led to almost a 50% decline in the stock market over the next 3 years. So look, I understand that the stock market is overvalued. However, what does this mean for silver investors? Let's take a look at some hard data. Let's push that away. And what we're looking at here, this is a very high picture overview, long term, in the post-Bretton Woods era. We're looking at the entire history of silver on the bottom since 1971 and the U.S. stock market on the top since 1971. We're looking at a log scale on the right for each of these, so you can see the upper levels get compressed here. That's so we can look at the percentages similar, whether we're talking about the percentage gain from 2 to 4, which is a doubling here on the y-axis, or percentage gain from 10 to 20, which is a doubling of the y-axis. These take up the same amount of space here on the log scale, just so you understand what we're talking about. So we're looking at silver, and there are so many people out there right now who are saying the stock market is overvalued. We just looked at that. Therefore, put all your money into silver. What does the evidence, what does the data actually show? Let's take a look at it. Notice, for example, the last stock market crash. We're talking the crash of 2008. We're looking from the peak in October of 2007 through the low in 2009. We're talking over a 55% decline in the stock market. What happened to silver at the exact same time? A simple shading, higher and lower. What happened to silver? Silver rose initially from 16 up to 21 and then crashed way below 16, falling all the way down to $8 and change in the most severe part of the crash, okay? So silver did not hold up. It did not act as a safe haven during a stock market crash. Let's look at the previous example before that. We're talking about the NASDAQ bubble. Stock market losing almost 50% of its value in a little bit under 3 years. What happened to silver? It did not serve as a safe haven. We can see very clearly here, as stocks were moving lower, silver was moving lower. Let us look back in time at another example, and it looks like a very slim little period here, and it is. We're talking about the crash of 1987 in the stock market. This was the single most severe crash in stock market history for any one day. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 fell over 22% in one day. Okay, so far outpacing these little jitters that we've seen here, these 2-3% down days. 22% in one day. The system went haywire. The stock market was overvalued. Fill in the blank for the reason why. Bottom line is 22% decline in one day. Silver did not rise, nor did it rise in the period following the crash. It continued to move lower. You can see that very clearly. There was no spike in the price of silver on a crash in a stock market. Let's look at one other example. I hate to beat this, but it's so important, because if you're investing your life savings in silver right now, at this point, or if you are highly leveraged in the silver mining equities with the expectation they're going to outperform as the stock market moves lower, I believe, unfortunately, you've been fed a myth that is not aligning with reality. So we can see the same thing happening here during this bear market from 1981 through mid-82. Stocks declining about 30%, silver not acting as a safe haven. These are all the bear markets in modern history in stocks, and we're looking at the relative valuation in silver. When is the one time that silver performed well during a weak period in the stock market? It was from 73 to 74 here. Stocks losing about 40% of their value, and silver rising from 2 to around 6. Why? Well, the important thing to remember about this period, this is a bit of an anomaly. The important thing to remember here is that silver was rising. Why? Because it was illegal for Americans to own gold. It was illegal. If you owned gold, the official store of wealth, the historic store of wealth for 5,000 years, if you owned gold officially, you could be fined and thrown into a cage. This is how crazy things were in the United States in the 1970s. And of course, this period happening when, after the 1960s, guns and butter, so let's enact all these social programs, which there may be some merit to, but of course only if the government can afford it. And when can the government not afford it? When it's also fighting simultaneous wars, unwinnable wars, on foreign soil, such as the war in Vietnam. So after that period of time, leading into the bull market in precious metals in the 1970s, gold was illegal to own, and so silver acted as the sole outlet for that inflation as far as Americans wanting to buy precious metals, despite the weakness here in the stock market. So look at these other periods of time in the freely traded era. Basically, any time that gold has been available to purchase where you would not go to jail for buying it, silver has not held up during a period of weakness in the stock market. And I would just ask you to think about the period that we're in now and think about how that aligns with your investment philosophy. Do you want to be going all in right now, or do you want to be waiting until the next bottom in stocks? Because if we look at when has silver performed best, the green shading, look at this. After stocks crashed, when stocks started to rise, look at how well silver did, right? 500% gain in silver. Look at the period from 2003 through 2007. After stocks bottomed, look at what happened. Stocks were rising, silver rising. Very nice bull market here. Let's look at the final example here. After stocks bottomed now, and what happened? Gold was finally freely trading in the 1970s. After 1975 is when Americans could own gold officially without going to prison for it, for crying out loud. Silver went up over 1,000%, but when, keep this in mind, it was when stocks were stable to rising. Okay, very clear here to see the correlation. So it's so important to pay attention to these actual data points. Am I saying to sell all your silver? Absolutely not. I had a conversation with a client today, and we were discussing his position in the silver market, and he's heavily invested in silver. And this is someone who's retired, mind you. But then again, his expenses, his daily expenses are covered on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. He has a source of income, and so for him, the silver is discretionary, and he can afford to sit on it, he can afford to wait, and he can afford to average his way into the lows here that are forming, and perhaps he's going to use that silver for some real estate purchases down the road. So that's one scenario. So I'm not saying that you should do any one thing based on this information. I am saying to really take a hard look, to really sit down and think about your situation. If you are too leveraged, if this is money that theoretically you may need to use in 1 year or 2 years, let's say you want to make a down payment on a property in 2 years, you got to be really careful. Because if the stock market is going to crash, which it looks like there is a significant top that is going to be forming in the intermediate future, then you have to do some real hard thinking about whether or not this is the time to be putting all of your discretionary money into silver. That's all I'm saying. Different strokes for different folks, as they like to say. Now, how to stay up to date on this kind of research. Number one, make sure to hit subscribe. The subscribe button is that red button that is below. It will alert you to when there is a new video posted, which is usually, but not every week, coming out once per week. Secondly, I do want to say thank you so much to those people who have donated to these videos on Patreon. I just want to say, if you are not interested in the premium service, but if these videos save you, if you can imagine, they save you a little bit of money because maybe you wait, right? As opposed to going all in right now, maybe you wait a few months or 6 months for some of your purchases. If these videos save you any sort of money or worry about what's happening in the market, I very much appreciate your support on Patreon for that. If you would like to go deeper into the actual trends that are forming here, there is a premium service that goes out weekly that covers our latest assessments on when the actual bottom is going to be forming for silver. So we're giving the latest assessments every week for gold, silver, the mining sector, as well as all of the mining companies that we are investing in here and when we are making those decisions. So that's a highly in-depth service for people that are looking to go to the next level. Finally, if you're like one of my clients today, who, as I mentioned, he's heavily invested in silver, but we had to take a step back and say, hey, when do you need these funds? How leveraged do you want to be in this sector? What are some of the reasons that you might need to use these funds over the next couple of years? These are the types of things that we discuss in the consultations. So please know that you can reach me. All I do is I look out for individuals to the best of my ability. I don't sell the metals. I don't sell any of the companies or anything that are represented here in this service. This service is simply to look out for you. I try to be in the corner of individuals, once again, to the best of my ability. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know this can be a bit of a hard pill to swallow sometimes, that some of the people out there who are pumping silver all the time, as if you have to buy silver all the time. We see there are better times and there are worse times to be investing in silver, and let us follow the trends as they are playing out in the market itself.